Hello guys, and welcome to this episode of Tech Tippin' Checkin' Tippin' Tuesday. This is a very special one because it's all to do with lockers, which is one of the biggest questions in the four-wheel drive industry, especially newcomers into four-wheel driving. They hear about these locker things and they want to know what they are, what they do I need them, don't I need them? Don't mind the noise in the background. The bro's just pulling an engine apart over there. This won't zoom in enough. So what I'm going to do in the description down below, I'm going to have timestamps for the different areas of this video because I want to take it right back to the beginning level. So if you want to scroll down there and skip forward to some parts that may be relevant to where you're at and your understanding, go ahead and do that. The first section is just going to be on a generic four-wheel drive system, so pretty much a standard four-wheel drive, how that's set up, and explain to you why that may necessarily not be what you want. Next, I'm going to go into why you'd want lockers. Then we're going to go into a technical section about diff locks and how they work. In particular, I've got one of Harrop's ELockers here, and then a comparison to a normal open center diff. Then I'm going to go into a field situation. So I'm going to show you in my patrol the differences between using a front or a rear locker or both up a certain section of track. And then I'm going to finish with some common questions, misconceptions, and I also put the word out on my Instagram page for you guys to ask some questions, and I'm going to go through and answer some of them for you as well. So without further ado, let's get into a standard four-wheel drive system. We need to go to I've done a drawing for this. Check it out.
Okay guys, so I've drawn up a awesome, apparatus. Look, you can tell I graduated from kindy, can't you? Jesus Christ. Here is my four-wheel drive setup in a nutshell. Diffs, tyres, probably 33s, 35s maybe. And in the center here we've got the transfer case. Now, this is the front of the vehicle, the rear, and, well, this is an engine. Standard four-wheel drive system. What you would have is maybe two, maybe three options. So you got two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive high, and then four-wheel drive low. So in two-wheel drive, your engine basically drives to the rear axle, through the transfer case, or your gearbox, and then straight to the back axle, which goes down the actual axles, like that, through two gears, side by side, and then a pinion gear straight from the drive shaft, and that operates the wheels. Now when you go four-wheel drive, what happens is the transfer case will lock that front diff and tie the front to the rears. But the same deal at the front, you'll have individual axles that come into their own gears, spider gears, and then your pinion gear out through your drive shaft. So the problem is, when you're in four-wheel drive, whether it's high or low, the only difference is the gears inside the transfer case changing the ratio. But when you're in four-wheel drive, it's not actually four-wheel drive because, as you can imagine, as drive goes through to the rear, these spider gears let the wheels rotate at different speeds because the circumference will change as you turn a corner. Because imagine if you're turning a right corner, this wheel could stay still essentially and rotate and pivot, and this outer wheel needs to spin around and make a larger arc. So the drive will actually turn down one axle. So say there's a scenario where this tire is on a rock and then that tire is on a rock and these two are in the air. What's going to happen is the drive's going to go through this diff and spin the open wheel, and that'll just rotate. And then the opposing wheel, that one's on the rock and this one's in the air, the drive will go down this single axle and make this one rotate. So you actually don't have four-wheel drive, you've only got two-wheel drive because the center diff is locked through your transfer case, but the opposing wheels are just going to spin in the air. And that is because of the differentials. So when you've got a locker, it locks these spider gears together as so, and the drive will be split down each axle. So all of a sudden you've got true four-wheel drive. And that was a terrible explanation. I'm not very good with me drawings, but I hope you guys understand. So when you have a four-wheel drive that have standard diffs, you've actually only got two-wheel drive at any time. And then when you lock the diffs in, you're locking the motion side to side. So these will now be rigid and rotate together. And then the front there will also be rigid and rotate together. Yeah, I think that kind of makes sense. Back to where we were. I was going to say back to the drawing board, but that's where we've come from.
Good not bought, mate. Do you know what these are?
They can.
Yeah, diff locks, yeah. So, why would you need a locker yourself? It's quite simple. Traction. After seeing that little explanation about a standard four-wheel drive system, you can see that the wheels aren't always going to be locked. So if you're going up a hill and one of the wheels goes in the air and it starts spinning, you're going to start losing that forward momentum. By putting a locker in, it locks both sides so the wheel that is on the ground will get traction and drive and torque and actually move the vehicle forward. You've got two diffs in a four-wheel drive normally. You've got the front and rear diff. Unless you've got a crazy six-wheel drive beast, then you might need a few more. But two diffs. People ask, do I need a rear locker or a front locker? I'm going to answer that a bit later in the questions section because there's no definitive answer to that. It's to do with your vehicle and the way you drive. But another thing to consider is not only going up a hill, on the flat as well. If you're in deep mud, depending on where you are, you're not going to necessarily get a wheel in the air, but you'll lose traction because of the slippery surface and also descents as well as ascents. So going downhill, you can actually use lockers as well to control your descent, because when you think about it, if you're got a diesel or a low range gearbox and you're using the engine, which is what you should be using going downhill instead of the brakes, using the engine revs to descend, if one of those rear wheels lifts up off the ground, that will start free spinning the engine and you'll actually run away. You will need the brakes. So by using a rear diff lock, you can actually lock in the rear wheel, so when you descend and a wheel lifts in the air, you're still going to have that lock back through the drive shaft. Well, not drive shaft, no, it is drive shaft. Back through the diff, then the drive shaft to the engine and hold that engine braking ability. Okay, so as an example here, I have an open center diff. This is literally just out of the backyard of actually my brother's garden, but it was in a 9-inch diff. And at the moment, it's just an open center. So basically it looks like 4 spider gears inside there, which I'll try and get an exploded view of what these are. But basically, if there's an axle on each side, depending on what has the most amount of traction, the opposite wheel is going to spin. So this is not an LSD, it's not a locker, it's a completely open center diff. And this is what's in most vehicles. Older cars, it always used to be open, but some late model 4 drives have LSDs these days, which means it's sort of a clutch driven system inside where you can actually kind of get semi-traction. So this video isn't about LSD diffs, it's about lockers compared to open center. So in a nutshell, an LSD diff will act like an open center diff in an extreme 4 drive situation. But for the purposes of this episode, my friends at Harrop Engineering have lent me one of their E-lockers to demonstrate what the locking system does. Now, I've used E-lockers for a long time. I've actually had them in my previous Patrol. You probably know this already. So that had front and rear lockers, as well as the Patrol I've got now has front and rear lockers. So I've actually had 4 of these before. So I trust them, I believe them, I know they work. I've actually also done an installation video on installing these lockers. I'll drop that link down below in the description there. So I'm not going to get into anything about installing these lockers. If you want to watch that video, click on that to give it a watch. But this is more about the technical side of how they work. So an E-locker. E is for the electromagnet. So this is an electronically controlled diff lock. There's other variants on the market which are air actuated and things like that. So this is pure electronically controlled, which is why I like them, to be honest, because no matter what, if you've got 12-volt supply onto these pins here, the lockers are going to work. There's not a lot that can go wrong. Up the line, you can just add an extra cable in and get the thing working again if you really get stuck. With an E-locker, this top ring here is the electromagnet. So once that's got a 12-volt trigger onto it, it only pulls about 2 amps or something, and it will energize this electromagnet. What's on this other side of that is the ramp plate. And it's called a ramp plate because either side of the pin is a ramp, which means as it rotates, the ramp will force those pins in. Now I've got these pins here, so this is an example of pins that have been taken out of a locker, and they're quite long. The reason for that is these pins don't actually lock the diff itself. All it does is engage the lock ring. Now, unfortunately I don't have a lock ring with me, but this is the back end of what the lock ring lands on, and this is one of the drive gears, one of the spider gears inside. So as these pins come forward, it pushes the lock ring onto this gear here, and this is forced inside the outer ring, and that's what gives you your locking engagement. So all the pressure and all the force is actually on this lock ring, which is heat treated, extremely strong, and it's pushed into the casing as well. So none of the load is actually put on these pins, which is a misconception out there. They think, look at the tiny things, they're shit, but they're not. It's actually just there to engage the lock ring. This is on the other side, so these are basically the 2 rings, the gears that the axles go into. So the spline sits in either side of these. And in reality, this outer ring that has no lock ring on it will rotate with the casing. And then this side, when it's in an open state, like an unlocked state, will spin independently. And then when that ring is engaged with the locker, it gets pushed in and becomes part of the housing, which means you've got 2 axles connected to a housing essentially, and that's what gives you your lock engagement. Internally, there's 4 smaller spider gears which have 4 pins, so it's a 4-pin design, which is very strong as well, so that as it's acting as an open center, it's got quite a lot of strength within the casing as well. And then once that locking goes in, all the load and stress is distributed around that casing, around those pins, and onto that lock ring there. Okay, so I hope I've touched on everything there about how they essentially work. So you press the button, it engages that electromagnet, moves the ramp plate around, which forces the pins into the lock ring, into this back spider gear, which connects that axle essentially to the casing, connected to everything else, locking either side of the wheels. I hope that covered everything. If it didn't, leave a comment and it'd be too late, wouldn't it? I think it's time now to get into the field and see how these things work. So let's jump into the patrol. Okay, so we're out here off-road situation, and I want to take you through a few different scenarios of why you need lockers, how you can use them, how the benefits, all that kind of stuff. And we can see it in a real world situation, real world. So I've got front and rear lockers, got the ELockers in this patrol. I've got a little section here, and what I want to do is 4 different runs. So the first run, I won't use any lockers, and you can see a bit of slippage happening in the wheels. Then I'll do a second one just using the front locker only, and just see how those front wheels crawl up the hill and get it to just bite a bit and get up there. Then we'll just do a rear locker, probably similar scenario, and then I'll do twin locks, and it should just crawl up easily. So let's jump in, do a run without, and then we'll start putting them on. All right, this is full open center, and we'll sort of just crawl up and see how it behaves. So I'm in this 4-wheel drive, I'm in low range as well. We'll see what happens. Yeah, it's getting caught there. So already, that front left wheel is trying to grab. So I'll try and wiggle my way past that with a bit of momentum. Oh, there you go. A bit more power. So what I might do now is just engage that front locker. I'll get it to spin again, just like that. Put that front locker in and see if it tries to grab. Look at that, pulls us straight up. Same again. Got that front locker on still, and it's pulled up. All right, now the rear locker run. I've moved the camera here, so hopefully this camera will pick up that rear wheel. So I might start with both lockers off and see if we can find that similar position where the wheels start skidding, and just see how it behaves when I engage a rear locker rather than the front one. So that rear wheel's spinning down there. Yeah, it's just skidding away. So rear locker goes in, and we'll just crawl forward slowly. Look at that, just walk straight out. And now with the rear on, I've still got a bit of steering. Like, it will fight you a little bit, but it's not going to cause too much bind in the system. So you'll actually still be able to steer the vehicle around, get fully out of there, make sort of a turn as well if you need to come out the top. All right, I just want to see if I can show how descending and that rear locker will help you with control. This isn't really the correct sort of terrain to show this on, but I'll see if it'll work. So I'll try and go down under engine braking and have that rear locker in, and see if you can see it trying to just hold the vehicle back if the wheel goes in the air. Mate, I might have just that much bloody flex in this thing, it might not do that at all. But for me, I'm not on the brakes at all, it's just letting it walk down. So I'll have to review the footage back there and see if the rear wheel went in the air and stop me from running away. See, if I'm not on the brakes and I don't have that rear locker, as soon as that back wheel goes in the air, I would have just shot forward with gravity. I'm going to hit them both and literally just let it crawl at this speed, and it should feel like I'm just going through the bloody car park at Coles, mate. I'm not going to be on the brake, not going to be in the clutch, just let it walk. And for me, I find this the ultimate kind of way you should run your 4-wheel drive. You should be able to get up anything if you're set up like this. There we have it. Disengage, and minimum wheel spin, minimum damage to the track, and you'll be able to get through anything. back to the studio. So we're back. Now I want to go into just a little bit about why I chose an E-locker or a locker in general. Okay, first thing, it's going to be better, you'll be able to get anywhere you want over a standard differential. Let's face it, you've got front and rear lockers, that is the ultimate solution. But it all comes down to money. If you can afford it, do it. If you can't, do one. And if you can't do any, well, you got to just put your foot down, I guess. So why was it the E-locker that I chose? Now, I've used them before, so I was happy with that. I know how they operate, and to be honest, the weak link in this whole design is what's external to the casing. It's generally if there's a short or a fault in the wiring further up the line, which means you can access it quite easily. If you have an issue with inside your diff, then you're out of luck out in the bush. It's not something you can probably fix quickly. Things like air actuation, you gotta have a compressor, you gotta have external drives, you gotta have hoses, you gotta have connectors, you gotta have electrical onto that compressor to make it operate. There's a lot more involved to get it working. It's a much more simple design for this. Also the installation, you can go check that video out that I mentioned earlier about installing them, but they were really easy to install. But you gotta understand, hopefully now that you know how they work, you gotta understand that when you're out in the field using it, that you think about what's going on within that diff as it's working. Because you can actually get yourself into a bit of trouble and put stress on other parts of the vehicle that you may necessarily not need to, because you don't understand how they operate. Another thing to keep in mind when you have a front locker installed, you can't be turning the wheel and going around tight corners with the front locker on. That's because the turning circle, the wheels are in opposing directions, and obviously the turning circle is different for the front wheels. You're gonna cause bind and cause sledging. Your car's gonna wanna go straight when all four are locked. All right, let's do it. Let's go into the questions, Q&As, and we'll have a look at all that. Okay guys, right. Now it's time for the Q&A chat little segment. So basically what I did is put a poll up on my Instagram for you guys to come and ask questions about lockers and anything you wanted to know because I was making this video. The question that got asked a majillion billion times was front or rear locker. Now this isn't a simple answer, it's to do with the vehicle you've got. Now most live axle four-wheel drives, so it's got a solid axle front and rear, the diffs, generally gonna have an LSD in the back. Now that's the first thing you need to check. If it's a patrol or a cruiser or something like that, you'll generally have an LSD in the rear. If that's the case, then hands down 100% go a front locker. Hopefully that video earlier showed you that depending whether you got a front or a rear locker, if you've only got to be able to get one, they both do the same job getting you up a hill. But if you've got an LSD in the rear, that acts as a locking differential to an extent. And I say that because pretty much when you're put the hammer down, those rear wheels are gonna lock up and spin. If you're in the sand dunes or in the wet, you'll have, what the f, hold on. Jesus, how's the interruptions around here? Oh my God. So what was I saying? Yeah, so if you've got an LSD in the rear, hands down go a front locker. So if you've got a front lock in and then got your rear on the LSD, you'll be able to get through most stuff. The only downside to that is they're not gonna operate in a downhill state if you need that control on the descent. Like the front locker will control your speed, but you ideally wanna have a rear locker for that to keep the thing straight, otherwise it could squirrel down a hill and you could sort of overtake itself and end up rolling, which is a bit of a hazard, you could say, I guess. But if your four-wheel drive does not have an LSD in the rear, then I'd probably go a rear locker. So you have that rear control, and if you're in a dune situation or something, you can just whack that rear locker in and still have the ability to steer. Because if you've got a front locker in, you can't really turn corners, but if you've got a rear locker in and not a front one, then you can turn corners a bit easier to an extent. It will still skid a wheel, but you'll be able to turn. So hopefully that answers your question between front and rear locker. Look at what you've got already. If you have an LSD, should you get a locker? Similar question to before. I think this is more for the guys that maybe already have a front locker and then they've got an LSD in the rear and they're thinking, do I make it a locker? Look, twin locked is gonna be the ultimate solution in any regard, depending on the driving you're doing. But if you're just a towing rig on the highway, keep your LSD. But if you're doing some hardcore full driving, then I'd invest in a rear locker as well because that's gonna be the ultimate setup. Can you engage a locker while moving? I'm gonna say no, but yes. It's not recommended, but it can be done. And I can only speak for the E-locker in this regard because they're the ones I got experience with and I know how they work. But that's only at low speed. I don't mean you're on the highway, you can whack that locker in, that's gonna do some damage. But if you're just coming up to a section of track and you're seeing the hills there and it's got some ruts in it, and you're just cruising a low range, yeah, go ahead, hit that locker, it will engage and up you go. The times you don't wanna do it is if a wheel's in the air and it's spinning already, you don't want to hit the locker then, because that's called what's called a crash lock. If you crash lock that diff, it means it stopped that spinning abruptly and shoved all that torque to the other axle, and you could damage the locker or even snap one of your axles. So make sure both wheels are spinning in the same momentum, and then go ahead and hit the locker button. Do I need lockers if I have traction control? All right, traction control. Is it a gimmick? Not really. Some modern four-wheel drives are getting quite good with traction control. I don't own one personally, but look, it's electronic and it's got a brain of its own. You want to be in control of your vehicle, especially off-road dangerous situations. Mechanical lockers, hands down the way to go. But if you've already got traction control and you want to add lockers, look, you're going to get up some stuff with your traction control, but I would recommend still getting lockers if you can afford it, and if you've already got, I don't know, a set of drawers in your car. Start small, people. Okay, what oil should I use? And this is maintenance on lockers as well. Okay, so you just want to use a normal gear oil, a high quality mineral gear oil, synthetic oil maybe. Some diffs, if they have LSDs, they need special LSD oil, which has more friction so that the clutches and plates inside can operate. If you have an LSD and then you go put a locker in, you won't need to use that LSD oil anymore. You can just use a standard gear oil, and that should be perfectly fine. All right, thoughts on the E-lockers specifically and how they take half a rotation to engage. Do you think this is a problem? Okay, look, short answer is no, I don't think it's a problem. I was aware of it when I got mine, and if you understand how they operate, it actually has a benefit, not a, well, what people call downside to this. They're designed like that so they engage smoothly. Ones that engage instantly, when you hit the button, you hear them lock in, it's a pin jamming into the diff. Harrop have gone for the route for more longevity, more reliability, and less maintenance. It's a design where it slowly rotates and pushes the pin in. So yeah, it takes half a second or half rotation to engage, but once it's in there, it's way less stress on the system. The majority of the time, once you're already locked, there's a lot of bind in the system, and the weight of the wheels and tires and axles and twisting and torsion, all that kind of stuff and physics adds up, and it will generally hold itself in a locked state when you're going from forward to reverse. And obviously I've worked with Harrop for a long time now, and I've actually had the pleasure of being invited inside their factory last year. So I flew to Melbourne and got a tour around their shop, which I actually did an episode on. If you want to check that out, I'll drop it down below as well. And I was blown away by the engineering, the quality control, and the way that they manufacture their products. Like, all Australian made, and it's all in-house. The machines they use for their machining are just amazing. State-of-the-art gear there, and it just gave me more confidence in their products. But that's it really for the questions on Instagram there. You guys know that I have a good relationship with Harrop, and I've been using their gear for a long time. And I mentioned to them that I wanted to do a locker video, and they kindly lent me the gear today to demonstrate that to you. Now, I managed to convince them to get a deal for you guys, which I'm really excited about, because what they've done is give me a special discount code for you guys. So using the code BNB10, for the first 20 orders of ELockers, you will get a free disc breather kit and free shipping. That's a whole lot of value if you ask me. So if you are in the market for an E-locker, you've come to the right place. So make sure, guys, use code BNB10 if you want to take advantage of that offer, and it's for the first 20 orders only, so get in quick. And yeah, thanks for watching this Tech Tip and Check and Tip and Tuesday. Of course, as usual, guys, if you had any DIY or techniques or anything that you wanted me to explain, or products you wanted me to review, make sure you drop a comment down below, because that's how this whole video came about. A few guys mentioned they wanted a video on lockers, and here it is. So make sure you drop that down below, guys. And other than that, thanks for watching. Press subscribe, hit that little bell next to it. Ding, ding, ding. That gives you a notification that videos have gone live, so you can watch them when you want. And I'm gonna burp. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take it easy, peace. So I've just been ripping around in this thing, you know, on the flat, but there's a jump over there. I'm gonna jump that, but first you gotta hit subscribe.